afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the season 2 of Zoroastrian Conversations. For those of you who've joined us on similar conversations before, this was an idea that came up, in a conversation with Johan quite a few years ago. And since then, we've, started this series. It's Johan's brainchild, and it's a very candid, the idea is a candid conversation with academicians and scholars of Zoroastrianism as to what attracts them to do what they do. And, Johan's been a great friend of, Vevaina all these years. He's also a native North American, so to say. So he's just on loan to the UK, as I would. His primary allegiance is to Vevaina in that sense. And so we are happy that he's involved, in this. And, before I hand it over to Johan, a few housekeeping rules. The Q&A will be through the chat box, so you can continue to put your questions in there while the conversation is happening or afterwards, and then we'll read the questions out, and then Professor Hintze or Johan can answer them accordingly. So with that, it's over to Johan. Please take it on.
Great. So thank you all for joining us for the second season of Zoroastrian Conversations, hosted by Vevaina. And before I get going, I would like to sort of turn it around and thank Arzan for being such a wonderful co-conspirator in this. I think this is a very, very unique opportunity for us to bring a little bit of what academics do to the community, and for the community to be able to also ask us what we do and follow up on things that they find interesting. And this is the type of forum that I hope that as the years will go on, will eventually allow us to sort of run the full spectrum of all the people working in different aspects of Zoroastrian studies. So I am particularly excited today to chat with our speaker, Almut Hintze, who is the Zartoshty Brothers Professor of Zoroastrianism at SOAS at the University of London. So along with Sarah Stewart, she is the prime mover behind the SOAS Shapoorji Pallonji Institute of Zoroastrian Studies, of which she is currently the co-chair. Almut also has the distinct honor of being a fellow of the British Academy since 2015, which for North Americans it may not be so familiar, but it is an incredibly prestigious academic distinction only bestowed upon the very, very top of the top in global academia. Almut specializes in early Zoroastrianism and the tradition of its rituals and texts, of which she has published several very important critical editions, including seminal works on the Yasna Haptang Haiti and the Zamyod Yasht. And just to make a point, when I teach Avestan this year, we use both of those texts. And so our students will be examined on both of those texts. It's a very fundamental aspect of what we do. And Almut also has the great distinction of having worked very closely with some of our most eminent Parsi high priests. And she's a regular visitor to India. And this is another very important aspect, I think, which has not always been the case with all of our colleagues. In this sense, Almut is truly sort of exemplary because she does both work in the European setting, but then also travels regularly to India, works with the priests, works with the manuscripts. This is really something that is a sort of a model and for what Zoroastrian studies and what Zoroastrian scholars should be doing, at least in my view. So in 2016 to 2023, she directed a collaborative project on the Multimedia Yasna, funded by the European Research Council with an Advanced Investigator Grant, to produce an interactive film of a complete performance of the Yasna ritual, electronic tools for editing our extant Avestan texts, and the text critical edition, not to mention translation, commentary, and dictionary of the Avestan Yasna. Once again, I think it's worth stating for North Americans that the European Research Council is the primary funding body for academic work in Europe, and winning ERCs, especially the advanced grants, is incredibly, incredibly competitive. So this is a great testament to not only Almut's intellectual breadth, but also to her ability to write really, really compelling grants for a broader audience than just simply people working in Zoroastrian studies. And I strongly urge you all to visit the MUYA website if you haven't done so already. It will give you a taste of what can be achieved combining digital humanities and traditional philological analyses. So in a sense, the new world with the old. And at the very top of the chat, you will see a link to the MUYA if anyone is interested. So please do check it out. It's really quite interesting. And if that were not enough, Almut's untiring efforts are now focused on a second ERC project that will run till 2028 to investigate the ritual tradition of the Avesta in India. And the project team films the performance of a full Visperad ceremony and provides a critical edition of the Sanskrit translation of the Yasna and studies the interpretation of Avestan rituals in Gujarati language sources. And the latter of which, I might add, have been rather underutilized in the academic study of the Zoroastrian tradition. And so this is, once again, to Almut's great credit that she's helping to raise attention for the study of Gujarati sources. And this is something I would like to just, before we talk about it further, it's worth really noting here, because there are a lot of Parsis in the room, the virtual room, which is that the study of Zoroastrianism has had a lot of work done on Avestan, a lot of work done on Middle Persian, some work done on New Persian, but very, very little academic work on Gujarati. So this is, I think, such an important aspect because it's very much, to my mind, akin to, let's say, studying the history of Judaism, but never studying the period of early modern Judaism, or never looking at Jewish sources, for example. Could someone please mute themselves? I think there's a bit of background.
There is some sort of a reverb.
Yeah.
It's not
I
anybody.
think Gauvar Surkari is not muted. If they could please mute themselves. So with that, let us kick it off and hear from her. So Almut, I'll sort of begin with the very broad and sort of open-ended question. So tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are from, and also specifically how you got interested in the study of Zoroastrianism.
Thank you very much, Johan. And first of all, I would like to thank you for this very, very generous introduction and the kind words of appreciation which you have found. And secondly, I would just like to thank you and Azan for inviting me to be part of this today and talk and speak to so many of my dear friends and scholars who are present here. And I would like to thank everybody for taking the time to attend this. Now, you have asked me about who I am and where I'm from. So this almost sounds like a gossip question. Who are you? To whom do you belong in Yasna 43? That is the question which Bohumanach asks Zarathustra. Now, as you know, my name is Almut Hintze. I am originally from Heidelberg, a city in Germany. And I did my first degree in Heidelberg. I studied ancient Greek and Latin and Sanskrit and Indo-European linguistics. I became very interested in the history of language by studying Greek and especially Sanskrit. And I was fascinated by the fact that actually the language which we speak has a history, which I had not been thinking about that at all. And then also the second thing which attracted me to studying these ancient languages was that through the language and through these ancient texts, we actually have access to the way people thought many, many years ago. And I found that fascinating. I was particularly fond of the Homeric epics and the access which the Greek language gave me to the way of thought, to the way people were thinking at these very early times. And so then after finishing my degree in Heidelberg, I then won a scholarship to go to Oxford and do an MPhil in general linguistics and comparative philology, with my special languages being ancient Greek and Sanskrit. And through Sanskrit, I became aware of Old Iranian and Indo-Iranian studies. This was all, my studies have always been for me a journey of discovery. I learned so many things which I had no clue about when I started off. And so through Sanskrit, I discovered Old Iranian, and I was attracted particularly to Avestan for two main reasons. One is its linguistic interest. It's the second ancient Indo-Iranian language alongside Old Persian. So it belongs to the ancient Old Iranian language branch, which is closely related to Sanskrit, to Vedic Sanskrit, which is the earliest stage of the Sanskrit language. And by comparing Old Iranian, excuse me, with ancient Indo-Aryan, with Vedic, we can actually reconstruct a prehistoric ancestor of these two historically attested languages, which is the Indo-Iranian parent language, which we don't have, but which we can reconstruct to some extent. So Avestan gave me the second leg of the Indo-Iranian language family. And what then made me choose Avestan rather than working on Sanskrit was the conceptual interest, the ideas which are encapsulated in these Avestan texts. The Avestan language is the bearer of these texts, which are extremely interesting from a conceptual point of view, especially from the point of view of the history of religion. So Avestan allowed me then to combine my interest in language and historical linguistics with that in religion. I've always been interested in religions, and the particular attraction of Zoroastrianism then became for me its role in the history of religious thought. I should mention I didn't know about even of the existence of Zoroastrianism when I started off my linguistic studies, but I discovered it through the Avestan texts. And then I decided to go to Erlangen to do a PhD in Indo-Iranian studies under the supervision of Johanna Nathan and Karl Hoffmann. And at that time, I had not yet studied Avestan. I had only studied Sanskrit and, of course, Greek and other Indo-European languages, but not ancient Iranian languages. And so I decided to do a text edition as a sort of a safe bet, because I thought, even if everything goes wrong, I'm still going to produce something useful. Namely, I'm going to produce an edition of a text of which we do not have a modern edition and a modern translation. And then I was looking for which text to choose, and I read various translations of various yashts, and I chose the Zamyat Yasht. I thought that was an amazing hymn. It's also quite substantial, it's quite long. It has 97 stanzas, and it has a lot of fascinating text passages in it, some of them pearls of Zoroastrian literature, and also of great interest for the religious history of Zoroastrian thought. And so basically, I was learning Avestan as I was doing my PhD. And alongside doing my PhD, I attended lectures by Karl Hoffmann and Johanna Nathan, and also lectures by Professor Bernhard Forsmann. Karl Hoffmann taught classes on the Gathas, and especially on the first, the Ahunavaiti Gatha, which I attended. And I still look up my notes even today from that time when I have a question about a certain word in those hymns. I also attended classes on Vedic prose and the Brahmanas, all of them taught by Karl Hoffmann. Now, while working on the manuscripts for my text edition of the Zamyat Yasht, I wanted to know where these manuscripts actually are, because I wanted to say when I talk about the manuscripts in my thesis, where these manuscripts are kept. That was quite easy to do for manuscripts kept in various European libraries in London or in Copenhagen. But then Geldner, on whose edition I was at the time basing my own edition, Geldner listed a lot of manuscripts from India. And so I decided to go to India and to find out where these manuscripts are today. I wanted to see them. And in particular, I was keen to know exactly where the manuscript F1 was kept. And I had no idea that this was not at all a straightforward question to answer in those days. I just thought I would go there and then I would find these manuscripts. And so Professor Karl Hoffmann introduced me to Dasturji Jamasasa, and so that Dasturji Jamasasa would help me in my efforts. And I traveled then to India in January 1989, and I stayed there for 2 months. And Dasturji Jamasasa had arranged for me accommodation with a Parsi lady called Nargis Chinoy. And then what happened was that Dasturji Jamasasa had a cupboard of his own manuscript collection. We all knew that Dasturji Jamasasa's family has a valuable and substantial collection which Dasturji Jamasasa inherited from his own father, who in turn had inherited it from Dasturji Mastri, who passed away in 1898 and who had been collecting manuscripts avidly. And so we knew that Dasturji Jamasasa must have a manuscript collection, and he very kindly and generously allowed me to look through that collection. And I just wanted to show you a picture here, because this was then one of the most exciting moments in my life as a scholar. I found F1 in the collection of Dastur Jamasasa. And here, then on that very day, which was on the 25th of January, 1989, you see, I wrote this letter to Professor Karl Hoffmann, and on that day, I found F1. I made a photocopy of that letter. This is not the original. And it was in the collection of Dasturji Jamasasa. And then there is a description of how these manuscripts were kept in that cupboard, and then how I found this particular manuscript. Of course, this letter is written in German because that was the language I used to communicate with Karl Hoffmann and Johanna Nathan. And then here you can see a picture of me holding the manuscript MK here with the page of the Jamyad open. So this was really one of the most exciting, still today, one of the most exciting moments. I couldn't believe it. And to find MK in that cupboard was quite unexpected because it shouldn't have been there. Geldner mentions the manuscript belongs to the collection of Madan. That's what Geldner writes in his Prolegomena. But this was now a collection of Dasturji Jamasasa, and the manuscript was unbound. The cover is gone, and it was bundled together with a text, with 2 texts in Pasant, and the manuscript itself was wrapped in brown paper and closed with a cord, and outside on the package was written Pasant texts, but MK was in it. And I had noticed when looking through the cupboard that many of the packages, these wrapped in brown paper, they actually say Pasant text or Pahlavi text, but there were Avestan manuscripts inside, sometimes packed together with other manuscripts. So this was then this discovery, and then when I got back to Erlangen, then I published an article on that.
That's very, very interesting. it's something that I've always wanted to ask you about, in fact. So it's wonderful to see it, and also to see, you know, young Almut.
Yes, I couldn't resist showing you that picture.
That's great. That's great. I think that's the whole point of doing these conversations. So maybe I can transition. So you've told us a little bit about your journey, and you've told us a little bit about the projects that you worked on early. So I'm going to ask you a question that I like. It's sort of in a sense, my favorite question to ask the people I'm talking to. What is your favorite book or article in the field?
Oh, well, I have got a number of books, of course, which I use all the time. For example, the works of Jean Kellens on especially the verb avestique and Léonard Racine, which I think are really fundamental to Avestan philology. But one work which has already also been mentioned by other colleagues when they were asked this question, I think it's still Bartholomäus Altiranisches Wörterbuch, which is still indispensable, although it's over 100 years old. And I really admire his scholarship. He has an opinion on each and every sentence in the Avesta and Old Persian inscriptions, and for each form which occurs in the Avestan language. And many of his proposals are still holding today, even if other proposals have been made. But it often turns out that Bartholomäus is actually the best. Of course, not everything has stood the test of time. For example, Bartholomäus' identification of many words as infinitives. And Karl Hoffmann used to say, Bartholomew was infinitivo man. He was obsessed with infinitives, and many words, he defined them as infinitives, but they aren't. But apart from that, it's still a very important work, and a book which I use almost on a daily basis. Some other work which I do admire is the work of William Edward West, who, and especially something which isn't really published, and these are his transcriptions of Avestan and especially Pahlavi manuscripts, and also the analysis that he has made of the dates and the scribes, the names of scribes mentioned in the colophons. These works are preserved in the Royal Asiatic Society in London, and we've had the privilege to digitize his notebooks, 75 notebooks, and we are hoping to publish them and make them available in a repository before long. We are working on that currently. And then the work of one scholar who has been much attacked for is Professor Mary Boyce. And I must say, although she was not an Avestan scholar, she was a Middle Iranian scholar, but she came up with, she dated, well, Zarathustra, whoever that is, basically the Gathas, into the 2nd millennium BCE. And at a time when the tide was very much into the Zarathustra, into the state, putting Zarathustra into the 6th century BCE. And especially her own teacher, Walter Bruno Henning, and followed by Mary Boyce's colleague, Ilya Gershevich, and later by Noli. But she came to the conclusion that it is the cultural context, so not on the basis of linguistic arguments, which I think provide our strongest argument for the 2nd millennium BCE date of the Gathas, but on the basis of cultural scenarios which we find in the Gathas. And I think that's very impressive.
It's interesting. All your choices represent very foundational works in the study of Zoroastrianism. And I think that is something that you can see that your work also aspires to create pillars that we can build off of. So let me turn to a different question. What are you working on currently? And so tell us a little bit about the ERC project, and in fact, tell us a little bit about both projects. And perhaps also, Almut, if you could, just for the North American audience, give them a little understanding of when we mean project, what are we talking about? Because that's less common in the humanities in North America.
Yeah. Yes. So a project, that is a research, you have a research idea. So something which you really want to investigate. And then around this idea, you formulate a way of achieving what you want to achieve. And that is a project. That means you describe the problem, and then you set out a pathway towards answering the research question which you have. And one question which actually arose from me witnessing Zoroastrian performances of Zoroastrian rituals. One question is, what exactly are the priests reciting while they perform these rituals? As you all know, they recite at a very great speed, and it's very hard, even if you know the language, it's very hard to figure out what they're actually saying. And I wanted to correlate the words which the priests recite with the event in which they are recited, and also with the actions which the priests perform in these rituals. And in particular, I was particularly keen on doing the rituals which are most endangered. And these are not the Naujot or some funerary rituals, but these are the Zoroastrian solemn rituals, or so-called high rituals, which the priests have to perform in a special state of purity, and nowadays within the fire temple and within a certain ritual precinct, which has a special degree of purity. And the priests themselves need to have that particular state of purity, the highest grade of purity, which they gain through a Barishnum ceremony that has to precede the performance of the ritual. So what I wanted to do was to record the performance of such a ritual from the beginning to the end. Now, this project idea had taken some inspiration from earlier work of Dastur Kotwal. Some of you may be aware of the film which Dasturji Kotwal made I think it was at Columbia University with James Boyd, where Dasturji Kotwal staged a performance of a Yasna ritual. And this film is about 45 minutes, and it shows certain sections of the ritual, but not the complete ritual. And then, of course, there was Michael Stausberg, who had filmed a complete performance of that ritual during his own work. But sadly, that film has been lost. And so we did not have a footage of a full Yasna performance. And this at a time when performances of these inner solemn rituals are declining. So then came also on my horizon the urgency of preserving it, of documenting it, in case it's getting lost in 1 or 2 generations in the future. And so then I also had the idea of doing an interactive ritual. So, you know, you all know films with subtitles, when actors speak and you have the subtitles. And I thought, why don't we do something like this for the Yasna ceremony? So then at least you can read what the priests recite. And then I also wanted to provide a translation. And this was the central project idea of my first project, which big project, which is called the Multimedia Yasna project. And it has taken many years of preparation, also in consultation with my PhD students at the time, Leon Goldman and Arash Zaini. We also had a preparatory project in which we tested some of the, the viability of the text editions, which we also wanted to do. So this project, the Multimedia Yasna project, has these two main streams of work. One is the documentation of a full Yasna ritual. It's of course staged, a staged performance, and we were very fortunate to have Adil Pezania and Aspandyarji Dadachanji as our priests, the foremost performers of these rituals, and also our collaborator, Dr. Ramya Karanjia from the Dada Atonan Institute, who very kindly made available for us the premises of the institute. And the second part of the project was a critical edition of the Yasna ritual, and based on the manuscripts. So that is the written text as it has survived in the written tradition. So the Multimedia Yasna project documents both an event, the ritual as an event, a performance in the film, but and the ritual and the words which the priests recite as they are transmitted in the manuscripts. And for that, we then made full text transcriptions of the text and translations and commentary. Obviously, it was too much for even to do the whole of the Yasna. So we split it up into smaller sub-projects, and I had then the privilege of working with a number of very fine young scholars. Some of them are here, I notice, and to work as postdoctoral researchers in that project, and to make editions, text editions, then published as books. And some of these books have already appeared, and more of them are going to appear very soon. So this was the Multimedia Yasna project, and I just wanted to share with you again my screen briefly, just to bring it a little bit more to life. What we do in this, what we have done, because it's completed now. So just a sec, I'm bringing it up here. So here you have the film. You see the Yasna ritual being performed by our two distinguished priests in the Dada Atonan Institute. And then this is the shot from our website, and of which you have the link. And here you can see the recitation text and a translation, and then also the ritual directions in Gujarati taken from Anklazaria's edition, and the ritual directions in Middle Persian taken from one of the manuscripts. And then you can watch it. See? And the film, in addition, also has a number of hotspots, and you can click on a vessel or on one of the items which are marked by hotspots, and then a window opens on the right-hand side, and you get an explanation what this vessel is about. So the idea was to open up this ritual and explain it, what it is about, what the priests recite, what's the meaning of these words. And this is actually my own translation here, which is given in English of the whole of the yasna, and make it available. And a ritual which otherwise, when it happens in real life, is of course restricted to members of the Zoroastrian community and not to outsiders like myself. And here now we actually have it documented, and we hope that it will continue to be performed for a long time. In addition to the two-dimensional film, we also did the film in 360-degree format. That means it was made with a spherical camera, which made 6 films, and our filmmakers, they stitched it together into a single film. And here you can then see everything that's going on. You can look into the pots, you can see what the other priest is doing while the other priest is reciting, and so on. So still contributing to making, providing data, providing information, opening up this ritual to the world and increasing awareness of it. So this was the Multimedia Yasna project. And the second project, which started at the beginning of last year, 2024, is called Avestan High Ritual in India, or Avindia. The European Research Council always requests you to invent an acronym. So MUYA is for Multimedia Yasna, and Avindia is for Avestan Ritual in India, or Avestan High Solemn Ritual in India. And we have just, this project is still more at the beginning. We filmed a full Visperad performance, which is a second high ritual, which is still practiced in India. And we filmed it this time, not at the Dada Atornan Institute, but at the second major Zoroastrian priestly school, which is the Karma Atornan Institute in Andheri, in Mumbai. And we are extremely grateful to the trustees of the Karma Atornan Institute for having given us permission to film there. And as you can see, the setting is quite different here. And here you can see our film team, and also Ramya Karanjia, who is sitting and alongside and ensuring that the priests don't forget some words as they recite. As you can see, the priests recite these hours-long rituals, all by memory. And of course, easily one forgets a word or two, or perhaps even a stanza. And the film does not forgive this, especially if we transcribe the words, you know, it shows. So we then would have to fix that somehow. And in order to avoid that, Ramya was reading along, and if there was a stanza which was being missed out, then we would stop the filming and they would do it again. Of course, they know it all by heart, the priests. And the priests here are again Adil Pesania and Kaizat Kotwal as assistant priest, because sadly Aspandyaji Dadachanji passed away just a few years ago, so he is no longer available. So we have now got the film of the Visperad ritual, and our film team are currently editing this. And we are going to use our tools, which we had developed in the Multimedia Yasna project, also for then making this film available. But the analytical part then of this ritual is different, is different from the Multimedia Yasna project. The Multimedia Yasna project was focusing on the words and the understanding of those words which the priests recite during the performance. The Visperad ritual analysis will focus on the non-verbal part of the ritual action. So ritual action has 2 parts of it. One is the verbal part, which are the words which the priests recite. And in addition, there is the non-verbal part, and these are the actions. And probably it could very well be that the actions are actually primary to the verbal part, to the ritual. And in this project, I want to analyze how the non-verbal part structures the performance. And we are going to do that on the basis of the film. And I'm also hoping we will be able somehow to visualize the ritual structure of the performance on the basis of the non-verbal part. But this is then the research which we will conduct on the basis of the film. So now in making these two films, we have actually created a record of a highly endangered Zoroastrian heritage. And you will probably know these rituals are no longer performed in Iran. The performance was abandoned some decades ago, 50 years ago, or even longer, during the Pahlavi regime, partly as a trend of modernization, but also partly, and as part of that, requests from within the community went down. So the priests did not need to perform them anymore. And then the know-how of how to do these rituals was lost. And once the link is broken in an oral tradition, it's very difficult to revive it. The ritual implements are still there in Iran, but the know-how has been lost. And now the priests are trying to revive it. I was told that they even look at our Muya film now to see how it's done in India. And you have still recitations of the gathas, but when you have seen a video clip of a performance in Iran, it also looks quite different from the imagery which we get in India. And so the Parsis of India, they still have this tradition and the know-how of how to perform the rituals in this way. The Visperad is even more endangered than the Yasna ritual. And because there are very, very few requests for it, only maybe a handful a year. And so I was extremely eager to record this ritual before it gets lost. And the Visperad is the foundational ritual for the Vendidat ritual, which many of you will be familiar with. And actually most of our manuscripts are of the Vendidat or Videvdat performance. And the Vendidat ritual is still needed to produce in the Nirangdin ceremony. There, it is performed at the end of a Nirangdin when the bull's urine is being consecrated and turned from Gomes into Nirang, which is then used in a wide range of Zoroastrian rituals, including the Naujot ceremony. So for that, the Nirang is needed, and that's why you need Videvdat performances. But the Visperad as a ritual is performed very, very rarely. It used to be performed much more frequently, and especially on the Gahambas. So the Visperad is a sort of festive version of the Yasna which is a daily ritual. So these are my two Zoroastrian rituals projects. And then I have a third project, which we should not forget, which is on Sasanian Bulai. And this is something completely different. And this project started now almost 2 years ago. And it is thanks to my collaborator, Dr. Yousef Moradi, that I have the privilege of working on this project. And this project is funded by the UK National Research Council. And Dr. Moradi excavated about 820 clay lumps, bullae, at the foremost one of the three main Zoroastrian fires, the Takht-e Suleiman, which was the home of the fire of Adur Gushnasp, the fire of the warriors. And these bullae, as you can see here, they come from the Sasanian period, and they have inscriptions in inscriptional Pahlavi, and they have a wide range of imagery. Here you can see a fire. And these bullae were clay lumps which were pressed on merchandise or on documents to seal them and to authenticate the content. And then it was sealed. Someone pressed their seal into the soft clay, which then produced this seal impression, and witnesses would have pressed their own seals around the central image. And Yusuf and I, we are working on an edition of these seals. More than 2,000 seal impressions are on those bullae, and we are planning to publish them as a volume of the Corpus Inscriptionum Iranicarum, and also publish them online. So this is as my three big projects.
So, Almut, thank you so much. That's incredibly helpful, and I think that allows people to get a range and see the various types of things that you've been working on, and it's nice also to see an interaction between sort of Zoroastrian philology and textuality and material culture in a very real sense. And not to mention, of course, anthropology and the interactions with performance studies and all that comes with that. So let me switch gears a little bit. What have you found most interesting or surprising about what you have read in the study of Zoroastrianism? Is that something that really has, in a sense, really struck with you and been a striking aspect of your journey through studying Zoroastrianism?
Yes, obviously, of course, I read a lot about Zoroastrianism, but what has struck me most is that Zoroastrianism is a living religion. So it has actually been the experience of Zoroastrianism, not at all something which is just in the books, but it is something living. And this are not only the contemporary community matters and life, but how these very ancient texts are being recited, and they live in the religious life of the community today. And so having first studied ancient languages and past civilizations, Sanskrit and Old Iranian from the books, it was just for me, it was an overwhelming experience for me to meet Zoroastrians on my first visit to India in 1989, and then see the religion in action and see that this is a living religion. It's not a dead religion. And this has really brought it all to life for me. And it's for me totally amazing still to hear these ancient texts being recited in prayer and ritual, and to see the religion being practiced. And then perhaps one other thing which has greatly impacted on me were the contacts with Zoroastrians in India, in Iran, and also in the diaspora. I am deeply impressed by the Zoroastrian hospitality of my Zoroastrian friends, their abiding friendship and appreciation of the tradition which they practice, even when it's just unconsciously. That's what I found mostly with my Parsi Zoroastrian, or maybe in Iran also. My friends, it is a lot of that is just done and believed, but unconscious. And perhaps in this way, I found somehow I found some confirmation in this of my own interpretations of the texts. And I've often been said by Zoroastrians, well, you are saying what we have always believed, but we don't know it. So that sort of verbalizing something which is sort of latently present.
Yeah, I think this is something that a lot of Western scholars experience when they actually come and take the time to travel to India and travel to Iran and engage with living community members, or even if it is a matter of going to a Darbe Mer in New York, or going to meet Zoroastrians in London or wherever it might be. So along those lines, can you tell us an interesting anecdote from one of your travels, whether it's in India or in Iran, that sort of captures your engagement with an interest in Zoroastrian studies?
Well, it's perhaps not so much an anecdote, but it's an image which I have. When I was working in the Kham Oriental Institute in 1989 and looking through Dasturji Jamazasa's collection, he came every morning. He came from the fire temple, and I still see him walking in, and he was wearing his priestly his priestly gear, his white robes, fluttering through the space there, and I still have that image before my eyes, and that's it's just has been remaining with me.
Okay. So let me ask you a slightly different question. What, in your opinion, is the future of Zoroastrian philology or textual studies? And sort of going along with that, what would you like to see done in the future by the next generation of scholars of Zoroastrianism? What do you think are the kind of important projects that we really need to be focusing on and building upon from the work that has been done up to now?
Okay, well, in my view, you ask me about the future of Zoroastrian philology and textual studies in particular.
That's what you want, yeah.
Yes, yes, and that's my own background. And I must say, I'm actually glad I have got this background, because it has really equipped me with the tools of dealing with our sources. And from that point of view, I think it will always be important, especially for the training of future scholars, that they do learn the languages. So even if later on, maybe they may move on working in anthropological studies or ethnographic studies, or move into social studies of the Zoroastrian community, or any other field, which does not really engage with Avestan or Pahlavi texts, a training that includes the learning of the source languages of the Zoroastrian religion, and there is no way around it. This is Avestan and this is Pahlavi. So for a student to be exposed to that is, in my view, very important, because it enables them to get a grasp of the complexities and also the pitfalls of interpretation. And even if later they don't work on contemporary topics, but you cannot study the Zoroastrian community without the awareness and knowledge of its historical depth. The history is constantly present. And in order to get a proper grasp of it, we should in Avestan and Pahlavi should be covered in the training of the next generation of scholars. And this, in addition, so Avestan, Old, Middle, and New, and then also the modern languages, New Persian, also Sanskrit and Gujarati. All of these are languages which are essential for studying the Zoroastrian sources. And you mentioned it yourself, Johan, the dire situation with the study of the Gujarati language sources. There is a wealth of material, also manuscripts of Zoroastrian rituals in Gujarati language, and this is a whole body of textual sources which has not yet even been looked at. Not even photographed yet manuscripts.
I think Dan Sheffield has done some. I think
Yes.
if anyone has sort of made the first foray into it, it has to be Dan, and Dan has done it for a long time. But it captures the problem. I mean, it's a bit ridiculous if you think about it, that we're talking about 1 and 2 people when we've got a vast body of literature that we could very credibly say is in fact the largest body of literature produced by Zoroastrians about Zoroastrianism.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
if you just in sheer volume, right? And I think it speaks a little bit to the way that the field is structured, but I think it actually but what you said earlier for me is very interesting because it captures the fundamental challenge of the study of Zoroastrianism. You cannot say, oh, I'm only going to study Gujarati and I'm going to ignore what came before. I'm only going to study New Persian because that's what I'm interested in, because it's a tradition, right? It builds upon what starts with Avestan. You can't skip Middle Persian because then you couldn't get to the later period. You can't. So in a sense, to have a really holistic, rich, historical, ethnographically grounded approach to living tradition, you really have to know a lot of things. And then, you start in ancient Central Asia and you land up in contemporary New York, so it can move in quite a broad context. So
Yes.
I'd like to just drill down a little bit more on that. I could not agree with you more about the language aspect. It's just you can't work with the languages. You're essentially stuck replicating what other people have said at some very basic level. But in terms of specific projects, like the way that you have targeted these very fundamental projects precisely because the ritual performers are quickly dwindling and the number of performances are at risk, what would you like to see, if you were sort of starting your career today, what would you like to do in terms of the arc of projects that you think will be fundamentally important moving into the sort of let's just say the next 25 years of the 21st century?
Yes, thank you. Yes. Okay. Well, I think we have already outlined one of them, which is close to my heart, which is to tap more into the Gujarati language sources and investigate them. So, and in particular, we are going to do that part to some extent in the present Avindia project, where it is one relatively small part of the project. But I'm hoping if everything stays well, maybe in the future to do more on those Gujarati language materials. And you are absolutely right in mentioning the name of Dan Sheffield, who has done pioneering work in that direction. And I would like to continue into that direction, into the future. Apart from that, one of the most pressing items, which brings us again back to the preservation of Zoroastrian heritage, that is, namely, we have collections of Zoroastrian manuscripts, especially in India, and we don't even know what is in there, what is in these collections. And these are treasure troves of material which currently we have no access to. And so one of my great dreams is that there will be a collaboration with various institutions in India, of a collaboration which will involve scholars as well as local people and priests to, first of all, to catalog the collection in a professional way, and also photograph the collection and make it available. And I think that would change our field tremendously. We would all of a sudden have so much more material which would help us to understand many questions much better. And so this is the preservation of the Zoroastrian heritage and the documentation. We now have the Alpaiwala Museum in Mumbai for the Parsi heritage, and we have the Buladi Museum in Yazd for the Zoroastrian heritage in Iran. And these are two very, very valuable and important initiatives which contribute to the profile of the Zoroastrian communities in those two countries. And in general, I would like to see Zoroastrianism to be better known in general, and that its significance in the history of religious thought is more widely recognized, and awareness within, and then also an increasing awareness within the community of the precious heritage of Zoroastrianism.
So that sort of, I think, leads me to my final question. And I think it's a very nice segue. So how do you feel we can grow this field and, as part of that, make it more accessible to Zoroastrians from the perspective of us as knowledge producers?
Yes. So I think engaging with the community in the diaspora, in Iran and in India is essential, and also involve members of the community as collaborators and also as students. So I'm very keen on education, rigorous education, solid education, which provides a firm foundation to the students in the languages and in the discipline. And the training should include philological, linguistic, and textual studies for young people. And universities, in my view, have an important part to play in the training of scholars of the next generation. And these students should include also Zoroastrian priests, not only lay people. And we are very excited at SOAS that one of the young Zoroastrian priests, Rohinton Mehenti, is planning to come to SOAS to study the Zoroastrian religion with us. And he is one of the most promising young Zoroastrian priests. So, and I would like to see a knowledge base of the Zoroastrian religion in the country where the religion is practiced. That means in India and in Iran. I would like to see scholarship there. And then that we can have collaborations with universities elsewhere and do work together.
I think we have actually, in Iran, there's actually a lot of work being done in pre-Islamic Iranian studies, and also in terms of contemporary ethnography and things. I think in that particular sense, Iran is actually far more active. The study of Zoroastrianism in Iran is far more active than it is in India.
Yeah.
Which is an unusual thing, because the financial resources of Parsis in India dwarfs that of Iranian Zoroastrians in Iran. So I think it's an inverse relationship between those two features, and I think it is something that is a bit of a shame, because into the 1970s you had incredibly knowledgeable scholar priests producing editions, teaching in the universities and such in a very active way. And then since then it has into the 80s has declined quite significantly, and now it would be quite hard pressed to find that. There are some efforts, and even government mediated efforts, to sort of change that, but it's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
And I think it also speaks to something quite fundamental, which is that a lot of the interest in the study of Zoroastrianism, not just living Zoroastrianism, or learning about one's heritage, is really moved into the diaspora. I mean, it's not coincidental that this is taking place, by Vevaina, right? And so I think I think we are seeing some very interesting globalizing patterns that are sort of emerging, and the world is changing in a sense. But
Yes.
I think what I draw from listening to you, and I think it's something that I think you and I share very much in common, is the idea that, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to understand Zoroastrianism as a lived and living and transforming tradition, but also one that has a long tradition that goes behind it. So it's not so simple to just cut it off and sort of reinvent it in your one's own image. And yet at the same time, you can't expect people in the 21st century to live like they're in Bronze Age Central Asia. So finding a kind of happy medium and working with that can only really be done through education. And I think that is the great value of what I think we as scholars aspire to. And I have to say, I very much appreciate you coming here and sharing your views, your ideas, your history, your experience with us. And I think it would be a nice chance. Now is a nice moment to sort of take some of the questions from people in the chat, which I think Arzan will curate for us. So I would just like to thank Almut.
Johan, can I just add one final thought?
Of course.
Which your last word brought up to my mind, which is that you and I, we are extremely privileged, and we are beneficiaries of philanthropic gifts, endowments which have been made, and so is the Vevaina Chair in Toronto, and then at SOAS Shapoorji Pallonji Institute. So the study, the academic study of the Zoroastrian religion is dependent on philanthropic support. The reason being that unfortunately, up to the present day, Zoroastrianism is relatively little known. It cannot compete with these big religions like Islam and Buddhism, Hinduism, and so on, Christianity and Judaism, which are so much better known. And they are always, will always be small subjects. And unless they are endowed at universities, they will not stay as a teaching subject for long. They will be scrapped because of lack of students. So philanthropic endowment is essential to keep the study of the Zoroastrian religion alive.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. I think this is something that I've always found a bit it's one of the things that I've wondered about a lot in terms of the history of philanthropy, and I talk to my sister about this quite often, is that Parsis have done an enormous amount of philanthropic work in hospitals and schools and housing and a variety of different endeavors. But when it comes to the actual study of the religion in the kind of, let's say let's say university level, surprisingly, not nothing. There has been some, and there's a great awareness, and Vevaina has done a wonderful job with this to sort of raise awareness, and Miguel Angel's post is really a reflection of that, and he's doing brilliantly with it. So this is just really, I think, the proof of the pudding. But it's just one of those things that the more you have endowed, the richer your own understanding of your heritage becomes. And I think it's worth saying that, if you look at the history of Jewish studies, in the late 19th, early 20th century, it was almost completely dominated by Protestant scholars who sort of looked at Judaism as just proto-Christianity waiting to happen. And it was only after World War II and the recognition from the Jewish community that their heritage was fundamentally at risk, that they started endowing posts. And today, Jewish studies is, in an intellectual sense, is such a robust and vibrant field, and it's not at the mercy of budget cuts at national levels or any of those things, because you have private endowments. And it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting. I'm very glad that you mentioned this, because this is, I think, one of the aspects of the study of Zoroastrianism, which often gets posed to all of us. I'm sorry, Almut, you've been asked this hundreds of times, and I am as well, which is, how do we grow the field, right? So you need to have people interested in working on it, and you need to have resources to provide them with the teaching tools and the pedagogy. And then after all that, you have to actually be able to place them at some university. So for example, it's worth saying that UCLA currently is in the process of recruiting a tenure track professor in ancient Iranian studies. The short list has been made. The interviews have not happened, but given the political situation right now in North America, UCLA has instituted a hiring freeze. So we'll have to wait to see. But hopefully, sooner rather than later, we will have another North American scholar of ancient Iran. How much they work on specifically on Zoroastrianism, or they work on, let's say, Achaemenid studies, or they work on documents or whatever, I can't specify. But I think, you know, we will see there will be some new action taking place. And I very, very much hope that whoever gets it will be able to really engage with the Zoroastrian, Parsi, and Iranian communities and Irani communities in Southern California. So I think that there's actually, you know, there is some more action to be taken place. And once they're recruited, maybe we can have them over for one of these future Zoroastrian conversations, though I have many other people in the pipeline as well to come. So why don't we take some questions? So Arzan, do you want to jump back in?
So I'll go through some of the questions while they were being posted have already been answered. So I will skip those. So please don't feel offended if I do so. The first question that was there was from Shirin Yasna, which is a question for Professor Hintze. What has been your experience with outdated belief systems or community resistance to your efforts through the academic journey?
Oh, outdated belief systems.
Almut, I think the question is sort of geared towards the idea that you're working and studying rituals. So are there people in the community who feel like, why are you wasting time with rituals that we are modern? I think that's the thrust of the question. And if I'm mistaken, please forgive me.
Oh, it's yes, of course, there are some people who think that these rituals, they are not important, and we don't need to perform. And that actually, that way of thinking has led to the loss of the rituals in Iran already. And if many people take this view in India as well, then we will lose them in India too. So my response to that is document those rituals.
So then the next question from Sam Bilimoria also is, have you made research on the actual nirang that stays germ-free for 5 to 7 years, as there are skeptics who don't believe that the nirang remains so, and it's a sham and it's unscientific? And how do you respond to skeptics like that? I mean, is that something that you've heard of? I mean, has somebody done research on that?
Yes, there have been some investigations into the nirang after it has undergone the nirang din ceremony, and they have shown that it is a substance which is perfectly fine also to sip, as it's done in the rituals, and that it actually has changed, is no longer urine. So I've not seen these studies myself, but I have heard reports about that. And apart from that, also remember, we are talking about religion, and which always has an element of belief in it, of faith, and either you believe it or you don't. There is nothing in between.
Thank you. Then there's a question from, oh, sorry, Johan, sorry, go ahead.
You can have wishy-washy beliefs. I think it's fair to say.
Wishy-washy, yes. Okay.
Then there's a question from my dear friend Shirin Kiamenich from here in New York. Question for Professor Almut. Has there been any study done that whether to show that with these rituals in India have had some sort of an Indian influence, or are they, how close are they to the original ones that would have been practiced in Iran before Islam?
Yes, thank you. That's a very good question. And of course, we do have Indian influence in India, as is to be expected, partly also in the pronunciation of some Avestan text. And we've also find that in the manuscripts, because remember, in the manuscripts, when priests copy manuscripts, they write what they say. And so instead of Zarathustra, you can find it written as Zarathustra with a J, as that's Gujarati influence. And if we want to find out any differences in the actions which the priests perform, then we have two ways of looking at this. One is to compare what we can observe in the ritual performance, and we now have the film of the Yasna ritual for that, with what we find in the manuscripts. How are the ritual actions described in the manuscripts? And in our Muya film, you already have the ritual directions as we find them in the manuscripts, written in red below the recitation text. And there you might find discrepancies between what the manuscripts say and what is actually done today in a ritual performance. Then apart from that, we also have the ritual being performed in different places in India, in Gujarat, especially. What we have documented in our Muya film is the tradition of Navsari, which is the one which is dominant in Bombay. Apart from that, there are also other traditions, one in Udvada and in Surat in particular, where there are some variations in the way the ritual actions are being performed, are being done. And this is one of the aspects which we would like to identify in our Avindia project. So to document also ritual variations in different areas, so local variations. Okay. There is a Kadmi tradition, for example, which again is a little bit different.
Then the next question is from Xerxes Bapu, and I think that was about that was when we were talking about languages. And how do you suggest that new Zoroastrian clergy and also young Zoroastrian kids be taught languages? In the sense that I know that in North America, the Iranian Zartoshtis do an amazing job of teaching Persian, to young kids. Like, all of the young, Zartoshtis who I know of Iranian descent in North America, they all know Farsi. But I would say maybe only 30% of the Parsis, people with Parsi background actually know Gujarati. So that's only the living current languages. Avestan is a much older one. Do you have any ideas on how one can kind of make that a little bit more mainstream, that people can, at least dip their toes in these languages?
Yeah, well, for the modern languages, Gujarati and Persian, that's the easy bit, because these are living languages, and so you can also spend time in India and then learn it. As far as the earlier stages are concerned, that's the language of the prayers, the Avestan language, and then also the Middle Persian texts about the Avesta and the Zoroastrian religion there. That needs to be learned in an academic setting, really. There are various classes. We have been trying also to teach Avestan to the priests and also to wider audiences. TIS, PASO, for example, are making an effort to teach Avestan and to wider audiences, and that's also a very worthwhile undertaking. And exposure is always a good thing. Exposure to to this teaching is very beneficial.
Then Caleb has an interesting question about, in these, you spoke about, both you and Johan spoke about, a lot of inaccessible, manuscripts that are either completely out of bounds, even to academics like yourselves, or to the general public. He is asking, do you think there is a chance of discovering any of the missing Avestan Nusks within those collections?
I'm not very hopeful that we will find new texts, texts which we don't know about. Of course, that's only a guess, but maybe there is something we don't know. But what we could find, what I'm really hopeful about, is that we find better witnesses for the texts. Some of the texts which we are struggling with, for example, the Nerangistan, they are in very poorly transmitted, and there might be a manuscript or more manuscripts of that text which is a better witness to it, and that would help us a lot in trying to understanding it better.
If I could jump in here, think of it in this way. Imagine that you got manuscripts produced from your great-grandparents, grandparents, your parents, and yourself. If, for example, your manuscript is not as sort of precise as your great-grandfather's one, for example, and we get access to an earlier manuscript, it improves our readings. It allows us to see that clearly, that something that we know is likely a bit funny sounding or doesn't look correct or whatever can be corrected for. So I think that's the great value of having more manuscripts. So, when Gellner made his edition, he had some 125 Avestan manuscripts, something around that number. And, now we know many more manuscripts that he did not have access to. Many have come out of Iran that have been worked on more recently. So, it changes the way that we understand that in terms of witnesses. But to the actual question about the Nusks, Dan Sheffield and I had a chat about this, and he has a feeling that there are things like that. May not be like a whole Avestan Nusk that is always sitting there that we're waiting to find, but perhaps there might be fragments of things that may survive in the Pahlavi versions or may survive as sort of descriptions of those things. And so I suspect that there will be things. And one really strange aspect of the study of Zoroastrianism, and just think about this logically, if you take the survey articles that Edward William West did in the 19th century that Almut mentioned early on, if you read West's surveys of what Zoroastrian literature looked like, and you look at, let's say, Almut's survey and Maria Matsuk's survey for Avestan and Pahlavi, they look extremely similar in the sense that the detail that the newer that more recent scholars have given is significant, but also the corpus has not changed in any great size. That is, what we had in 1875 and what we have today in 2025, 150 years, it's not there've been all these new discoveries of texts, no new Dead Sea Scrolls or anything like that. In Zoroastrian studies, in material with, let's say, the seals or coins or Middle Persian documents, we keep getting new things. So either the finds have not been made in Iran, many new manuscripts have been found, but it's like finding another Videodar manuscript or another Yasna manuscript. But so this is actually a strange issue because the descriptions we have in the ancient sources tell us about texts we don't have today. And in fact, even up to the 19th century, the Parsi scholars mention texts that now we can't find. So clearly those things have to be somewhere. Now the question is just where they are and will we ever get access to them. But I think that will also improve our understanding of the Zoroastrian tradition. But probably the best and most important way would just be to study Zoroastrian knowledge production in Persian and Gujarati, because they have been far understudied compared to, say, Avestan and Pahlavi. Though Avestan and Pahlavi are what those texts are talking about. So you can't just say we won't study Avestan and Pahlavi anymore. You'll be stuck. You'll be back into a kind of tautological problem.
Then Kersey Schroff from Washington, D.C., a dear friend, he had this observation where he was saying that Johann's point regarding the greater study of Zoroastrianism in Iran rather than in India can also be extended to Central Asia, which I'm guessing is Johann, is that the case? I mean, that there is a lot more happening all around Central Asia, not just in what is today, Iran itself.
Yeah, so in Central Asia, and Almut, correct me if I'm wrong, there is a lot of archaeological work. So in Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and such, they're doing some really fundamental archaeological work that is, in a sense, digging up the pre-Islamic Iranian, broader Iranian world. So clearly, in terms of archaeology, art history, material culture, that is absolutely the case. In terms of like studying Avestan or Pahlavi, there is some, but I don't think it's as at anywhere in scale like what you have in Iran. As a point, for example, all of us who have academic jobs, with it, almost every few weeks, maybe I get them less than Almut, maybe Almut gets many more than I do, but we get emails from people in Iran who said, I've done a master's in ancient Iranian studies, studying Avestan and Pahlavi, and I would like to pursue a PhD. And, many people have. So we see enough of those people, and they're being taught in enough number of major Iranian universities. That's what I mean by saying there's quite a bit of study of these things. Unfortunately, for a variety of political reasons and linguistic barriers, there's a lot of output that's happening in Persian, articles being written in Persian on Avestan and Pahlavi and such, that we don't always get access to. But one great thing is that now, because of PDFs and things like that, unlike, say, 30, 40 years ago, young budding scholars of Zoroastrianism and the ancient Iranian heritage in Iran have access to much of what we are publishing, which is actually having a very profound impact on how they are writing, because they are actually studying what is being produced in the West. Whereas I feel many of us in the West are actually kind of ignorant of what they are producing. So in fact, it's skewed. And that's not to say that the quality of production is the same, and I'm not making any equivalence. I'm just saying that as a point, it is something to recognize. It is a challenge, actually.
Yeah, because it's published in Persian, so there is a language barrier for many.
And sometimes the publishing sites and such are not so easily accessible. I had one of my Persian students, my Iranian students, was just going to Iran, and there were some books that I wanted, and he said, and because of exchange rate and the devaluation of the currency, they're so incredibly cheap. But they're just, sometimes he has to go to a specialist publisher to find the thing in the market somewhere. So there are always these inefficiencies that exist in all of our work. Just like if an archive is off limits to us, it makes the study of the field fundamentally inefficient. But that's just the nature of how knowledge production evolves over time.
Then Hormuz Godrej has an interesting question, which probably is maybe too broad, but I'll put it out anyways. What were the major differences between the religious beliefs of the pre-Zoroaster era of Iran and the post-Zoroaster era? Did Zoroaster fundamentally revolutionize the religion that came before him, like how Muhammad did in the founding of Islam? Or did Zoroastrianism evolve more gradually from the religion that preceded Zoroastrianism?
Thank you, Hormuz, for this question. It really touches on one of the hotspots in the debate about how we imagine the genesis, how the Zoroastrian religion started. And what you just outlined is one is a revolutionary model, that there was one big change introduced by a historical person, and the other one is Zoroastrianism emerged organically out of a prehistoric Indo-Iranian religion. And that Zoroastrian, so these are the two models, and we have scholars who defend one or the other, and others, some of them are sort of in between. What is very clear is that Zoroastrianism has both very, very archaic features, for which we have correspondences in the Vedic religion, and which therefore we think are inherited from the Indo-Iranian past. But also there are distinct differences compared to the sister religion, the Vedic religion. And these differences, which are usually the ones which we describe as innovations, and it is innovations which are distinctive. And so those differences are, first of all, we have nothing like the figure of Zarathustra in the Vedic tradition. Secondly, we have the demonization of the Daivas. So the old Indo-Iranian gods are bad in the Zoroastrian religion. And how do we explain this? And then it's a question of how you evaluate the sources. Some scholars, they say, oh, who defend the view, who take the view that the Zoroastrian religion developed sort of organically over many centuries without the intervention of one particular man into what we have it historically. They say, so the demonization of the Daivas happened slowly over time. And then there is a question how you evaluate the sources to form an opinion. So we cannot say for sure one way or the other. We don't. You cannot prove it one way or the other. You have to evaluate the sources and then form a balanced view. And then I can only say what I think personally. Looking at our earliest sources, which are the Gathas and the Yasna Abtanghaiti, there I see that the Daivas, that voice which speaks in the Gathas, clearly has an axe to grind and is very vehemently opposed to those Daivas, who are then sort of subordinated bit by force to the worst thought, which is what we have later as Angramanyu. So Angramanyu then becomes the head of the Daivas, and the Daivas are described as his offspring. And to demonize the gods of the old religion is not a small thing to do. And so in my view, the vehemence with which this demonization is taking place points to me more in the direction that there was actually an individual who intervened. And then the third question is then the exaltation of Ahura Mazda as the only god to be worshipped, and the subordination of all that is good to this particular deity. And then he is then the source of both the spiritual and the material worlds, creations, and the material comes out of the spiritual. So we also have a cosmology here, which is there already in the Gathas, in my view. And all of that, for me, it are new ideas, for which we do not have in this form equivalents in the Vedic tradition. And to me, it points to a change, and not to be forgotten, also a change in the ritual practice. This is the other thing which the Gathas go on about. So it's not only, of course not, it's the gods who are rejected, but the gods don't exist in a vacuum. There is a whole host of priests who promote the cult of these gods. And it is those priests with which there is a battle going on. Of course, those priests, their livelihood is at stake. If the gods are being ousted, what do those priests do? they lose their jobs, basically. And and the Gathas speak of that, in my view. But of course, that's all open to interpretation.
I will take the opposite side just for the fun of it, okay? So on the Daiva question, it's a really fascinating question. And I think it's also a very fundamental question, because it's sort of how you think about it as a scholar conditions how you see the evolution of not just the Zoroastrian tradition, that is the lived tradition, but also how you see the fundamental spiritual content of the message of Zoroastrianism, right? If you see what I'm saying, that is how you structure the beginnings matter. But on the Daiva question, and with everything that Almut says, I could completely agree with. I don't have any. I mean, to me, it's perfectly reasonable. But if you make sort of the old devas into Daivas, and you ascribe that, someone ascribes that to say the transformation or the revolution of a single individual, hence Zarathustra, then you have a bit of there's an interesting consequence that comes with this conceptually, which is that all the Iranian languages have done this. So Avestan is the oldest attested Iranian language, but it is not Proto-Iranian per se. So you then have to work your way around that and suggest that that happened so early, Zarathustra did that so early, and all the rest of the Iranian world essentially had some type of quasi-Zoroastrianism in that sense, and that spread everywhere. Whereas if you have the idea that, for example, the Deva-Daiva split happened earlier in time, that it is a fundamentally Iranian feature, broadly speaking, then you don't have to deal with it in that, you don't have to deal with that problem of motivating how that happens. Having said that, you're back then to a different question as to when you think the split between the Indo-Iranians took place, what you think the relationship is between the two communities. We say that Almut says correctly that the old gods, the devas, were the Indo-Iranian gods, and we can see that because divinity, the word in we have in English and such, divine, these words are all have the same semantics in the positive sense as we get in Sanskrit. But then we have to sort of model out the time period. And also one thing that I always wonder about is how the river, the Indus, is sort of the divider in a sense between the Iranian world and the Indic world, right? But when we're looking at Zarathustra's material and the Gathas, we're really looking out somewhere in Central Asia and Afghanistan, we think, based on the geographical references we have in the Videvdat, which are the only things that we know of that put Avestan out that far. So then the question is, do they have any contact with their quote-unquote proto-Hindu or Vedic neighbors? And it's another problem. So there are every decision that you take, in a sense, this is something general with Zoroastrian studies, and that's why I think it's so much fun. Every decision you take intellectually triggers off new sets of problems that need resolution and create new they imply new historiographical challenges. So
Can
I think
just respond to this briefly, Johan?
Sure.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you. You want to finish first?
No, please go ahead.
I think it's what you just said just throws up and shows once more how interdisciplinary our field is. And we cannot answer the questions which you have just asked without looking at archaeological evidence. Because we are here talking about prehistoric times, and we are touching on the question of the migration of the Indo-Iranians, and we are deep into archaeology already here. And then there are various archaeological models. I've actually great interest in the question of the migration, and which takes us back into the 3rd, 2nd millennium BCE. And then, you know, the Sintashta culture has played a big role, which is late 3rd, early 2nd millennium BCE. And we think it is Indo-Iranian. And this is the area where the spoked wheel was invented, and which plays a big role in the imagery of in the Gathas, the horse race, for the prize at stake. I talked about this in Bombay, the chariot race, and the migration of the Indo-Iranians. And we think now that what are the later Indo-Aryans? They are the tribes which moved southwards first from the steppes up in the north, and the later Iranians moved downwards later, after the Indo-Aryans had been moved maybe partly through lands of East Afghanistan into the Indus River via the Indus Valley via the Bolan Pass, and also then coming up from the north west via the Kabul Pass into the Indian subcontinent, presumably at some point in the early 2nd millennium BC. And the Iranians would have followed later. And I personally have no problems in dating the Gathas into the around the mid of the 2nd millennium BCE, because for linguistic reasons, especially the presence of the laryngals, these prehistoric sounds, which must have been pronounced still at the time the Gathas were composed. And now the question of the demonization of when were the Gathas composed, and are they an early Iranian document spoken before the Iranians dispersed and moved into different directions? So it could well be that the demonization of the Daivas is an early Iranian inheritance. And then is the question of the exaltation of Ahura Mazda as the only god, which is also something which marks the Zoroastrian religion as Mazda worshippers, both in the East and in Western Iran. And of course, that you degrade one set of gods and you exalt another one, that is something which sort of goes in tandem in some ways, and it makes sense to combine that. But we are talking here about thought models.
Yeah, I think one aspect, Almut is completely right. It's about modeling. It's how you model it will let you see how it allows you to sort of explain what you think is happening later. But I'll tell you there's an interesting aspect that I think is that I think we can really agree with. And I think Almut and I would agree on this. I think most Iranians see this the way that some people who work on Vedic don't see it in the same way, which is that when you read Vedic, as large as it is and as archaic as it is, themes, sort of what we would call sort of religious themes about ritual, about thought processes, they tend to sort of play out over 2, 3, 4 strophes. So, like, let's say 4 lines, for example, right? So, a theme would last maybe 16 lines, let's say. Whereas when you read the Gathas, you see something remarkable, that these themes can trace themselves over so many more strophes. It's just a more, I'm not saying, I don't want to get into, it's not a question of sophistication, or it's not a question of better or worse. I think that's a very childish way of thinking about it. But it's a way of recognizing that the type of thought process embedded in the actual poetry is designed to be much more expansive in that sense. So because these themes float through such large amounts, so many strophes, it often makes it extremely challenging for us to work out what they're saying, because in a sense, you have all these multiple repetitions that play on these themes. So in a strange sense, when it's discrete, it's like if your data set is 4 lines, it's much easier to make sense of it than if your data set suddenly extends to 44 lines, if that makes any sense. I think that's an unusual feature that really is different between the two traditions, even though the style of poetry in many ways, the way of composition, all the technical aspects clearly are inherited from Indo-Iranian. And I think that says something about the composer of the Gathas that is, from the standard of Vedic, unique. So take that as, who you want that to be is really up to you.
Yes. You see, Hormaz, what stir you have caused with your question.
So I think with this, we are way past what we thought was going to be the talk. We generally, think there would be 75 minutes or so. We are now close to 2 hours. So thank you very much, Almut and Johan. It's a testament of the interesting conversation that we were having, that we couldn't get through half the questions that came on. At the same time, we had nearly about 100 people staying on for pretty much the entire duration of this talk. So we hope to continue these conversations, and I'm sure this is not the last time we are hearing you, and we look forward to other forums and other speakers. So thank you very much on behalf of Vevaina and the Vevaina executive and all of the member associations. Thank you to all of you who've joined us today, and we hope to continue these conversations in the weeks ahead. Many of us will be meeting in person at the Vevaina AGM that's happening in Toronto, and the WZCC conclave next week. So, we look forward to continuing some of these conversations there too. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a great rest of the weekend, and see you on the next Zoroastrian Conversations in a few weeks.
And thank you so much, Almut, for joining us today. And it was really wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Everybody. Thank you for your questions. Yeah. Have a good evening.